Now,
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
And ready, set, go. Let's fly into this weekend together the right way. It's 8:06. It's O'Connor and Company coming up in 30 minutes. Brett Baier from Fox will check in with us. I'm Larry O'Connor with Patrice Onwuka. Good morning, Patrice.
Good morning. Happy Friday.
Yeah, and you know, big financial economics types like you, Patrice, and our guest Steve Moore, who is a former Trump economic advisor and now a fellow at the Heritage Foundation. This is your day, man. This is the day to analyze and explain what Vice President Kamala Harris is going to propose for her vision to fix the economy. Steve Moore, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Larry, great to be with you.
Uh-oh. Oh, I think you just flipped your Bluetooth there, bud. You with us? Yeah, I know exactly what happened because I heard the car door close, and this happens to me.
It shifts. Yeah, this happens
to me too. It shifts from Bluetooth to your handheld, but if the shift didn't happen on time, this is what happens. All right. Well,
I'm sure we'll get Mr. Moore back in a moment.
We will set things up, though, for you before we bring Mr. Moore back in, and that is, first you've got this spectacle of Kamala Harris already telegraphing earlier this week through placed leaks with Axios that she's going to attempt to pivot and distance herself from some of the unpopular economic policies of the Biden administration, which is kind of hard to do.
Bidenomics.
Right, Bidenomics, which she loves and has embraced, and up until, about a minute and a half ago, she said was working. In fact, last I heard from the Biden campaign, we have the strongest economy on the planet, right? And so first she's going to try to pivot and distance herself, but then the solutions that she's supposed to propose today to bring prices down are absolutely terrifying and have never been tried that I know of here in the United States of America. Even Roosevelt with the New Deal didn't try this kind of Marxism. Steve, thanks for getting back here. So explain to me exactly what Kamala Harris is going to propose today, because it sounds literally Stalin-esque. This sounds like central planning.
Well, Larry, to understand this plan, you have to understand that the reason we have inflation is those damn people who run the grocery stores and the 7-Elevens and
right.
They're price gouging. They're just
and by the way,
prices.
And Steve, to understand that they were never greedy during Trump's presidency.
Exactly.
But as soon as Biden was elected, they decided, okay, guys, time to be greedy.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, Kamala is going to bring an end to that, and she is going to stop the corporate greed and the price gouging. Now, by the way, I have a piece in the New York Post that it will be there today, this morning, where I point out that consumer prices are up about 20%, as you know. We've talked about this many times on your show. But guess what? How much producer prices are up?
What?
Exactly the same amount.
20%. Well, exactly. That's the part of the equation. It's like if they're suggesting here without any evidence that these prices are being jacked up artificially to screw the consumers, and they're never actually pointing out that the cost to make those products have been jacked up. Yeah. So, Steve, just so I can understand, because everyone's throwing.
Let me just make one other quick.
All right, quick. Sure.
Anyone who looks at like the margins for a grocery store or a 7-Eleven or most retail stores, their margins are razor thin. I mean, they are so. It's amazing they can make money. They're literally operating on 2 or 3% margins. So if Kamala comes in and says, "Hey, we're going to take that margin away from you," guess what? Those stores are all going to shut down.
Oh,
now,
for sure.
Here's the thing, Larry. You misspoke on one thing. You said this has never really been tried before, and that's kind of not true. Actually, in the 70s,
please.
In the 1970s, we did have price controls. In fact, Richard Nixon, in a very famous, I remember this, I was 11 years old, he had a nationally televised address where he said, for the next, I think it was 60 or 90 days, no business is allowed to raise their prices, no wage increases, because we're going to stop inflation. It was the dumbest thing I ever saw. It was a complete failure. And so what
didn't inflation get worse?
Yes. Well, no, what happened was for 60 days, there was no inflation because, they would throw businesses literally in jail if they raised their prices. And as soon as the 60 or 90 days was over, guess what they did? They just jacked up their prices again because the inflation was so out of control. Now, let me make sure that your listeners understand this point, because this is important. the reason we have inflation is not because of greedy corporations. Corporations and companies are in business to make a profit. Now, I know that's a very alien concept to somebody like Kamala Harris or Joe Biden, who have never worked for a business in their whole life, so they have no idea how businesses operate. But the fact of the matter is that whenever these things have been tried, what happens is, number one, you get shortages. So the classic example of this is in New York City. In many big cities run by Democrats, they tried rent control. Do you know what happened, Larry and Patrice, in New York, where they tried rent control? You got a lot of rich people who got apartments for $200, but there were no new apartments built, and so literally you had people having to sleep in tents outside because there was you reduced the supply of things. I mean, this is Economics 100. I taught for 2 years, Economics 100 for college students. If I was giving my final exam to my kids and I asked them, do you think price controls will solve the problem with inflation? And if they said yes, I would give every one of them an F.
Well, and that would be rightly earned, Steve. I mean, you talked about rent control, and she's going to talk about housing. Again, a national rent control is what she's targeting. She talked about, going after price gouging, and we have seen the Biden administration through the Federal Trade Commission and some of the agencies trying to quote-unquote crack down on price gouging, yet that hasn't worked. Today is the 2-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act. Steve, did it work?
Yeah. So, and by the way, I think it was. I'm actually sure of it. That thank God that Kamala's there, because she cast the tie-breaking vote. It was 50 to 50 in the Senate, and the Cape Crusader came in, and she's bragging about that. By the way, she bragged the other day that I tried. Well, that bill has been a total disaster. It was supposed to save $300 billion, but oops! Instead of saving $300 billion, the latest estimate is it's going to cost another $1 trillion because of all these programs. The other thing they did was they put Medicare drug price controls. That's how they were going to solve the Medicare problem. Guess what? Now a lot of seniors aren't getting drug coverage. Gee, that worked out well.
So you just said that, oftentimes when this happens, we suddenly have shortages. And last I checked, Steve, and again, I mean, I'm hardly an economist. I'm just, living in the real world. If there's shortages on a supply, if there's a shortage on a supply of any given good or product or service, doesn't that drive the cost of those things up because you've got less supply and therefore there's more demand? I mean,
ding, ding, ding. See, you said you were not an economist, but I'm going to give you an honorary answer. Absolutely, yeah.
So, am I right to think that you actually have you have to have a master's degree to be so stupid as to think that Kamala Harris has something going on here?
Yeah. So this is a really. Obviously, I think any thinking person would agree. And incidentally, this is the one thing I'm an economist. I've been an economist for 30 years, and I've dueled a lot of liberal economists. And I'd say one of the very few issues that just about every single economist on the planet agrees on is that price controls don't work. And even Jason Furman, for example, a guy who I've tangled with on, he was Obama's chief economist. He's been writing about what a stupid idea this is. So these people are economic ignoramuses, and if they get into office, I hate to tell people this because I don't want to ruin people's weekends, but if God forbid that Kamala was in the Oval Office, I really believe that she would be worse than Biden. I really do.
Yeah. Steve, can you stick with? I got a few more questions on this. Are you?
Yeah, sure.
You can. Okay, good. You know the drill here. You've guest hosted before.
I've known you a long time. I never knew you were so good at economics. So let's do it.
Only because I talked to you, my friend. All right. 1 minute from now, we'll continue because this is very important. Honestly, we finally get a policy from Kamala Harris, and it's literally Hugo Chavez. 8:15.
On day one, I will take on price gouging and bring down costs.
Okay, so first of all, here's what we've learned. There's no evidence of any price gouging. You would think when you say I'm going to take on price gouging that at the very least you give one example of price gouging. But number two, that won't bring down costs, as we've just explained. Here's how bad it is, Steve Moore. I know that you're probably shocked to see this. Washington Post opinion piece today. Here's the headline. When your opponent calls you communist, don't propose price controls. It's hard to exaggerate how bad Kamala Harris's price gouging proposal is. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I did see that article, and this is a woman who is the woman who wrote that piece is a pretty left wing, economist.
She's hardly
writer. Yeah. And she's saying this is a really dumb thing to do, Kamala. By the way, it is true. Companies, look, anybody who runs a company, if you can raise your prices, you will. But the problem, that's the wonderful thing about the free market economy. I can, as a business, charge whatever I want, and you, as a consumer, can say, "I'll take it or leave it." You don't want to. This is the magic of the pricing system. It's the magic of the free enterprise system. It's a voluntary exchange between the buyer and the seller. I have to emphasize the fact that nobody in the Biden administration, with a very few exceptions, and no one around Kamala. By the way, when I said that they didn't, they don't never ran a company. They've never even worked for a company. Can you believe that? They spent their entire careers in either academia, government, or other kind, or maybe being lawyers. But they have no idea what it is to run a business and how hard it is to making a profit is a really hard thing to do.
Well, and Steve, one of the other things that make it really hard for businesses is taxes. We are up against a massive fight at the end of next year when the wonderful 2017 tax cuts are set to expire. Where do you think, is Harris going to mention anything about taxes today? And do you believe her claim that she's not going to touch taxes for anyone making less than $400,000? I certainly don't.
Yeah, so great point, Patrice. And by the way, just to correct one other thing that Larry said earlier, that I am actually still an economic advisor to the Trump campaign. So just for full disclosure, I'm providing advice with Larry Kudlow.
I'm happy to hear that, actually.
And so we did the plan. You may recall in 2017, we did the Trump tax plan, and it was an incredible success. And the reason we did that plan, the main reason was that the United States had the highest business tax rate in the world. We were higher than even China and Russia and all these other countries. And I remember showing Trump, explaining this to Trump, and he kind of knew it. And I said, this is like a plan that puts America last. We have the highest tax rate. So we lowered the tax rate, not because we love corporations, but we wanted jobs and capital and businesses to come back to the United States. And boy, did they. And we saw $1 trillion of capital come back, migrate to the United States. It created an incredible number of jobs. So it was a huge, huge success. And Kamala is running around saying this was a big tax cut for the greedy corporations. Well, no. My old boss, Dick Armey, do you remember Dick Armey, the House Majority? He was, famous for a lot of, he was so clever. He used to say, liberals love jobs, but they hate employers. And it is so true, isn't it? You can't have a job without an employer. Hello?
We saw Donald Trump yesterday sort of lay out his criticism in advance, which, by the way, I think it was great to get out in front of this and focus on inflation and things. What specifically should be done going forward now that we actually have something to point to and say this is what will happen, this is what Kamala Harris intends to do? Is it enough to just say this is communist? Is it, I love the fact that they're calling it the Maduro plan, but maybe some real world examples, Steve? Can you give us some that we can use in our own, friendly debates that we have with liberals who are in our lives?
Well, I mean, just look at what's happened. Every time you get whether it's socialist, communist, whatever you call these isms, they're all basically the same. They're more government control. You create poverty and misery. I mean, in Venezuela, they were literally having to eat the animals in the zoo because they ran out of food. So we don't want to go in this direction. I want to make sure that your listeners know that we just did an analysis where we looked at the 25 major economic indicators and measurements of how an economy performs. And what we did, Larry and Patrice, was we did a side-by-side graphics of what happened under Trump, because he was president for 4 years, and under Biden and Harris. And on 22 of those 25 measures, Trump's performance was superior. Whether it's small business confidence, whether it's inflation rate, whether it's mortgage interest rates, whether it was a real take-home pay. I mean, here's the killer statistic, that under Donald Trump, the average family gained, after inflation, about $5,500 in income. That's a pretty big income increase. You know what the number was under Biden and Harris? Negative 2,100.
Oh.
That is to say, the average family is poorer today than they were when Biden came into office. And so, yes, let's have this debate about the economy. We want the debate not to be about abortion, not to be about social issues, but we want it to be about the kitchen table, pocketbook issues that affect every single American. And I guarantee you, if people go into the voting booth and say, who's better for my wallet, I think Trump's going to win a landslide.
Steve Moore,
current
economic advisor to the Trump campaign and also a fellow at Heritage Foundation. Always good to talk to you, Steve. Thank you, sir.
Okay, guys, have a great weekend.
Thanks
Take
for the
care.
education, as always. I, for one, I'm really looking forward to reading David French's column this week, The Conservative Case for Central Planning and Price Controls.
Yeah, let's see how he finagles that one.
It's 8:23.
Now
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It is 8:37 on O'Connor and Company. It's Larry O'Connor with Patrice Onwuka. Patrice, we've been waiting for the Harris campaign to actually put forth one major policy initiative to clearly, in detail, articulate what they intend to do should they win the election 80 days from now. And we got it. Today, we'll hear this announcement of an economic initiative. And here's how the Washington Post, a column in the Washington Post this morning, describes it. It's hard to exaggerate how bad this policy is. It is, in all but name, a sweeping set of government-enforced price controls across every industry, not only food. Supply and demand would no longer determine prices or profit levels. Far off Washington bureaucrats would. The FTC would be able to tell, say, a Kroger in Ohio, the acceptable price it can charge for milk. At best, this would lead to shortages, black markets, and hoarding, among other distortions seen previous times. Countries tried to limit price growth by fiat. There's a reason narrower price gouging laws that exist in some U.S. states are rarely invoked. At worst, it might accidentally raise prices. That, by the way, from Catherine Rampel. If you look at her byline, hardly a fan of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And that's her analysis. Bret Baier joins us now, anchor, of course, the special report at Fox News Channel. And Bret, we've been waiting for some policy, and now we've got it. It makes this election that much clearer, I think, if the economy is going to be a major focus.
Yeah, good morning. I think it's really interesting that her first economic policy is to the left of Joe Biden.
Yes.
I think it's that's the first one out of the gate. And, listen, President Nixon tried price controls. In fact, I used to cover the Pentagon, and Don Rumsfeld, as defense secretary, I talked to him about his previous life and different jobs, and he was in charge of price controls in the Nixon administration. He said it was the worst decision any president could make, and he was behind some of the efforts to make it work or try to, and it never did. It didn't work in the U.S. It hasn't worked in socialist countries. And I'm kind of surprised that it's being launched this way. The other one is a $25,000 credit on a down payment for a house. And, there's other people saying, well, surprisingly, also announced today, housing up $25,000.
Yes, exactly.
The cost of a house. Right?
Hey, the cost of my house just went up $25,000.
There you go.
Yeah, so I think, out of the box, we'll see how it's delivered, but it is a little surprising.
Well, Bret, next week is the Democratic National Convention. I presume you and your colleagues at Fox will be there covering it live. Is that right? And what are you
Sunday.
Okay, what are you expecting, both outside protest as well as inside the actual hall?
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. I think that the protests are probably real and will materialize. I mean, we saw some things in New York already this week, and the anti-Israel crowd is going to be present. They've already filed for protest, permits and that sort of thing. And I think inside the hall is going to be an interesting, packaging and how it's rolled out. I don't think there's not one scheduled, a big interview before the convention starts. And that's going to be about, bringing forth this nominee in a different light than she was just a year ago. Many people in the Democratic Party, as you know, were talking about replacing Kamala Harris on the Biden-Harris ticket. So President Biden speaks Monday. That'll be fascinating. And then he gets off the stage and, the rest of the week is all about her.
Bret, it's been discussed, and of course, both Trump and Vance continue to harp on the fact that Kamala Harris, up until this point, has still not actually given a press conference or sat for an interview. Neither has Tim Walz. Frankly, Joe Biden, other than the one exchange with Robert Costa of CBS News, which was hardly a probing interview, if I may say, it is remarkable considering the earthquake, the political earthquake that took place just 3 weeks ago. Never in our history has this sort of thing happened before. And it's one thing for the candidates to complain about and point out the fact that they have not actually have to answer a serious question about what transpired here. I'm shocked that there aren't more members of your community who are sort of going along with this. If I may coin a phrase, where's the outrage, Bob Dole?
Yeah. I mean, I agree. We don't know what happened between Saturday and Sunday when President Biden was going to be the nominee 100%. 14.5 million Democrats voted for him. It was done. He's not leaving. And then Sunday, you know what? I'm going to put out a letter on X.
But
and say
it's not like
gone.
This is a story about his dog biting Secret Service agents, which they also haven't answered questions about. But this is kind of a big deal, Bret.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's on the scale of an attempted assassination attempt where we don't have any information about anything.
Yeah.
And I think that there are big stories here that have to be told. I also think, I had Nikki Haley on the show this week, and she said, listen, stop whining about press conferences and interviews. Just use the words that she said and use those again and again and again on policy. And she really wanted to get a message, I think, to the former president, who accepted it yesterday in his press conference, saying he would like to welcome her to campaign with him around the country.
Yeah.
If I could quickly follow up, that was an important interview, and it's the first. We know that that Ambassador Haley came out and supported Donald Trump at the convention, but that was when Joe Biden was still the candidate. Did you get a sense from Ambassador Haley in that interview that the fact that Kamala Harris is now the nominee and Tim Walz, fairly one of the more left-wing governors in the country, if not the most left-wing governor in the country, Gavin Newsom aside, that the stakes are raised here for Nikki Haley and potentially for those sort of Trump-skeptical holdouts that may still be sort of on the fence?
Yeah, and I think she feels an obligation to get that word out to that crowd. She was very forceful on a number of different points about, she, at the end of that presidential race, was saying time and again in almost every interview, I'm not running against President Biden, I'm running against Kamala Harris because she's going to be the nominee.
Yeah.
She was very prescient in that. And I think she's trying to say, this is the warning that I was giving, and this is why it's important.
All right, Bret, thank you. Listen, we will be tuning in to watch your coverage next week. Good luck. Have
Thanks.
fun. Keep your head on a swivel,
Start
please.
Sunday.
I worry about Chicago. I do. So,
Thanks, Bret.
Yeah, we will. All right, we'll see you.
It is 8.
Mark Levin, weeknights from 6 till 9.
On News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
Making sense of the news.
It's a sad story, but it deserves some focus. An update on the tragic death of Matthew Perry. And it is a tragic death. I know that he had a lot of problems and he was an addict and all that, but it appears that this death certainly was an overdose. We know that. But it also appears as though there were some really nefarious doctors who apparently are now facing criminal charges because of their exploitation of this addiction. Take a listen here from a press conference yesterday on this.
Defendant Placentia was a medical doctor. He worked with another medical doctor, defendant Mark Chavez, to obtain ketamine. He then worked with Mr. Perry's live-in assistant, defendant Kenneth Iwamasa, to distribute that ketamine to Mr. Perry. Over 2 months, from September to October 2023, they distributed approximately 20 vials of ketamine to Mr. Perry in exchange for $55,000 in cash.
Jeez.
Defendant Placentia saw this as an opportunity to profit off of Mr. Perry. He wrote in a text message in September 2023, quote, "I wonder how much this moron will pay." He also stated in text messages that he wanted to be Mr. Perry's sole source of supply.
Wow. I mean, this is a drug dealer. He may have a medical license, but this is outrageous and despicable. And I didn't know this. His stepfather is the journalist Keith Morrison, actually, formerly with Dateline NBC. They're investigating this and getting to the bottom of it. They want criminal charges, if not a civil lawsuit as well. But it's addiction is an awful thing, and when that addiction is exploited like this, it is absolutely evil. And it also sheds light on, whenever you, not to bring it back to politics, but everything these days. Whenever I hear people discuss the abortion issue and the issue with license, this should be a decision between a woman and her doctor. Well, let's not forget, there are doctors like this out there. Just because you have a medical license doesn't mean that you have some moral or ethical sort of superiority. There are bad doctors out there, too. It's 8:53. That is a wrap, Patrice. Thanks. Have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday.
Yeah, you too.
Chris Plant, your work has just begun. What are you going to talk about?
My work has just begun. You're right about that. I'm gonna start by trying to make the internet work, and then maybe the television, and then beyond that, we'll get to the news. Then we'll get to the news after that. Lots of we become the Soviet